The Philadelphia Eagles are on their way to Brazil for the season opener against the Green Bay Packers this Friday, and I think it might be the hardest opener they've had in a very long time. We'll get into it on this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to a Monday edition of the show. I'm Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri, and this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use our code in all lowercase, LockedOnNFL, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. Prize Picks. Run your game. It's game week. We made it. We're through the offseason. The Eagles are on their way to South America for their matchup against the Green Bay Packers. Friday Night Lights. And we finally get to dive into a matchup. Gino, as much as I love training camp, roster cuts, 53-man roster predictions, the preseason, this is what it's all about, and we made it. We're back.
This is the first time that we can actually look at this thing like a game of Battleship. Where are each of these teams going to line up their arsenals? Where do teams have weaknesses? Where do the teams have strengths? And looking at this matchup, Lou, this is one where you're looking around the board and saying both ways, it is a matchup that if either team wins, it wouldn't be shocking. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be one of those games where it's 10-3 and it's just like a bruise and beat them down in the defense. You can expect a lot of points with two high-flying offenses down there in Brazil on Friday night. It's going to feel like a high school football game almost. It's playing weird on a Friday night. I can't wait for it.
Yeah, and we had Thursday night 2018 after winning the Super Bowl. It was weird, like being the opener for the NFL. Having the first game on Thursday and then you play on Friday is going to be a different feeling. But yeah, it's very high school football, college football vibes. And that kind of makes sense. It's the Eagles and the Packers, Gino, because these are two of the top three youngest football teams when it comes to the combined average age of the starting lineup. So these teams are not going anywhere when it comes to being top contenders in the NFC. This is the hardest season opener the Eagles have had since that Thursday night game against Atlanta. In fact, since that 2018 matchup, the Eagles have not played a playoff team from the year before in the opener. So this is their first time in a long time they've really had a big test in the opener.
And I love what you said there. These are two teams that aren't going away. These are two teams that are preparing for the future. And it's not just the 2017, 2018 Band-Aid type of team for the Eagles. Even Green Bay for the longest time, Lou, was like, they're just trying to put a team together to compete with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and then another ring. Yeah.
Then once Rodgers was gone, it was like, all right, time to fully rebuild. And they did it the right way, man. Like, you got your quarterback, you surrounded him with weapons.
They did it the most Green Bay way ever.
You talk about Carson Wentz being mad at the offensive unit that Jalen Hurts currently has. If I'm Aaron Rodgers, seeing the weapons that Green Bay has surrounded Jordan Love with, I'm saying, dude, you gave me 1 year of that great offense when we won the Super Bowl, but outside of that, it wasn't as good as this Green Bay offense truly can be, because Josh Jacobs is in the backfield, Lou. You got to start there. How are you going to combat him? Are you going to put one of your safeties on him and just spy him all game long in the pass game as a rusher? Then you go to their wide receiver room. They got 5-6 guys that they can line up, and then two of the best young tight ends in football. And we're talking about guys that are 24, 25, 26 years old, much like the Philadelphia Eagles, which are set up in a very similar fashion. So if you want to see maybe a preview of some future NFC playoff games, I think that's exactly what we are going to get come Friday night.
The Green Bay Packers are the youngest team in football right now. Yep. The Eagles are third. So yeah, this isn't the 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys, where it feels like the team's still going to be good this year, but they're on the come down. No, like the Green Bay Packers, they're not going away anytime soon. They were the youngest team in football last year and almost beat, like people forget, that was a close game down to the wire in the divisional round. They beat Dallas in the wild card, the first 7 seed ever to win a playoff game. Then they pushed the Niners to the brink in San Francisco. Like Jordan Love almost brought them to an NFC title. And if you look at their stats at the end of the year from an offensive efficiency standpoint, from weeks 12 on, they were number 1 in pass DVOA. They were 5th in rushing DVOA. Jordan Love's EPA and completion percentage over expected was number 1 in football. Like, I know it was only half of a season sample size for how good Love was, but I think he is a legit player. Like, this is going to be 2 of the best young quarterbacks battling it out on Friday night.
And sometimes it only just takes one of those games for it to click, right? I mean, all of a sudden, Jalen Hurts comes out there in 2022 and he's a completely different.
Yeah, that Minnesota game is like when it clicked.
Yeah, everything just kind of fell into place. And it's like, all right, now we can go. The team is flying. We know that our quarterback, everything that we have been installing for weeks. I mean, that's what you put your trust in. You put your trust in the quarterback, and you don't take the trust away, because then you're kind of putting one hand tied behind your back. Like with Jalen Hurts, live by him, die by him. Like you can't take away one of the elements of his game, much like Jordan Love. I think once they found out the strength of his game where he can really get it downfield to those receivers, which are really good 50-50 ball catchers, and you have Matt LaFleur, who he has that Shanahan scheme element to him, that's an offense that you got to be ready for. And that's why having Fangio here with Kellen Moore, I think, is setting you up really well for this first matchup, Lou. Because if you're going to talk about another offense that use the Shanahan type of motion, get guys on free releases, well, Fangio's been seeing that all summer long going against Kellen Moore's offense. I think this is going to be one, Lou, where, yeah, they're going to be a ton of big plays, but both defenses have good, young, explosive athletes. It's going to come down to the guys winning their one-on-one matchups at the end of the day.
And Green Bay has some change too, Gino. Like, they have a new defensive coordinator in their own right. Mm-hmm. Their defense struggled a lot last year, and they've added some pieces. Like Xavier McKinney was the big fish free agent at safety that even we wanted on this podcast. The Eagles did pursue him. Instead, they got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, so that was a big add by the Packers. As you mentioned earlier, they brought in Josh Jacobs in the backfield. This is a legitimate test. It was already a good rising team, and I think they really did well this offseason in adding talent. So it's a huge test. It's, again, the first time the Eagles have played a playoff team in the opener since 2018. Normally, they win their week 1 game. And, I think that's so important now more than ever to start fast, considering the way you finished last year. Like, for this team's psyche, they're in a really good place right now. Like, the vibes are high. You want to keep that going against Green Bay. Like, this is a very important game. And as we mentioned last week, it's also important for seeding. Like, I know you don't want to think about that already week 1, but Green Bay is one of those 5 teams you're looking at like, yeah, that could be a top 2 team in this conference. We need a battle for home field advantage with.
That's why we were saying that it would be great if you were playing one of the AFC opponents in this first game on the road in a neutral site where, yes, it might not have as big of a bearing down the road in the playoff picture. But Lou, one of the things that it presents an opportunity, in my opinion, is as good as they have been winning these games in week 1, they don't always start fast. If you look at the first half of the games in week 1, they looked abysmal. I mean, I go back to the Jacksonville game when Nick Foles was there, and then you look at the Washington games, like a tale of 2 halves, and you just look at how many times
New England,
Detroit, yes, exactly. Yeah. Look at every single outcome.
Shaky. Yeah,
but they win those games, and it stems from overcoming adversity early on, and that's it. It might turn out exactly like that, Lou. Like in the first half, you put together 1-2 scoring drives, but there's some missed opportunities in the pass game. Maybe you missed a hole or 2 in the run game. But then in the second half, that's when the Eagles tend to come alive. But if they come out just guns a-blazing, Lou, Jalen Hurts is like 5 for 6 on their first drive. They put together like a nice 9-10 play drive. The defense looks fast, and they could get Jordan Love off the field. I'll feel really, really good for the rest of that game, because it will be unlike any other first week that we've seen in the last 6-7 seasons or so, because you're talking about a game that, even though it's week 1, has so much importance in the grand scheme of the NFC. You have to go in there.
Continent, which is crazy.
Yeah, you have to go down there with the mentality that as soon as we step on this field, it doesn't matter where we're playing, who's in the stands, we have to beat Green Bay. Because if we have to go into Lambeau come January, it's not an advantageous position to be in, if we're being honest. Like, going to this, it's a one-game season. Know that this could have a really big outcome now, and it could set things up for a future rivalry between these two potentially. I would like to see that. These are two of the most young, exciting quarterbacks in the sport, and you can't take this Green Bay team lightly, which maybe is one of the reasons that these teams have started slow, Lou. Oh, it wasn't a playoff team. Maybe we could kind of just go through the motions out of the gate. Can't do that against Green Bay. You got to get on the field, snap one, and be ready to go.
Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts are 3-0 in their week 1 matchups since 2021. I think they need to get to 4-0. It is very crucial to get this win on Friday night. Who's starting for the Eagles on both sides of the ball? We got a little bit of an update from the coaches today at the podium. We'll get into it coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, guys, today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast were brought to you by Game Time. They've got a brand new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. So Game Time Picks, what is it? It filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And the great thing about Game Time Picks, it makes it easier to save money on sports tickets, concerts, comedy, theater. They're all in pricing. Their toggling feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. I know that's a huge thing with other ticketing marketplaces. Game Time, they take the guesswork out of buying seats. Plus, you get a panoramic view of your seat at the time of your purchase, so you know on top of the great price, you're getting a great view. So again, take the guesswork out of buying tickets through Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And guys, today's episode of Locked On Eagles, we're also brought to you by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in your childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language? I kind of want to learn Italian a little bit. Maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era can come at any age. So if you're starting therapy or thinking about it, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapy anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity through BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOn. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. The Philadelphia Eagles are playing a regular season game this Friday night in Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. And, again, they're the third youngest team in football heading into the year. I saw Adam Schefter tweet that out on Saturday, and it feels surreal because normally they're on the other end of the spectrum. They're normally one of the oldest rosters. It does lead for a lot of excitement, a lot of potential, but also still a lot of questions. And I think right now they still really, I don't want to say they don't have it resolved, but there are still some questions about like who is starting, who's going to get the majority of reps in rotations where there's not exactly a quote unquote full-time guy, right? And I think it's mostly on the defensive side of the football. And Vic Fangio today was still kind of mum when it comes to linebacker. He said you'd kind of like to have it figured out by now, but the competition's still ongoing between Zack Baun, Nakobe Dean, maybe Jeremiah Trotter Jr. even when it comes to snaps. And then, when it comes to the edge rushers, the tackles, I am very fascinated to see, who is playing the majority of the time or if there really is an even split between some of these guys.
I think the one key and the hint that we kind of got from him was about Quinyon Mitchell saying that he is going to play all of the snaps. That, man.
He's going to be base outside, nickel, slot, the whole game.
Exactly. So if you look at that where it's okay, regardless of personnel, we're going to try and get the best players out there, and we are still going to rotate to a degree. Go look at past teams of Vic Fangio. He starts out with a very big personnel group, and then he starts to whittle things down. Because if you talk about the linebacker competition, Lou, how many times have we seen these guys against other teams? We haven't. Like, we have to see what guys are ready to go. I mean, there's been how many times? Countless. Who is that middle linebacker, Lou? Was it Eric Wilson for the Eagles a couple years ago?
It was a disaster. Yeah, the guy they signed
former
from
Minnesota Viking.
Yeah,
it's
terrible.
like you thought he was going to come in and be your starter, and then all of a sudden he's a guy who just can't anchor in the middle of the field and gets blown off the run and just can't get to his spot. And it's like, oh, that plan didn't work. Well, you got to find out if Zack Baun can actually play middle linebacker against the ones. You got to figure out. I think
that's the one you're going to realize quick. It's probably Nakobe Dean and Trotter that should be playing over this guy.
Well, Nakobe Dean should be on the field 100% of the time. And
I think he's earned it.
If he doesn't get it right away, it's going to be evident when you look at the explosive element to his game, when you look at the best guy in coverage, because you're not going to play Ben Van Sumer in as good as he was in coverage. That was against 2s and 3s in the preseason. Nakobe Dean's explosiveness is made for that type of game, right? And in these packages where you go heavy defensive backs, who's the one guy that you're going to have on the field? Is it going to be Devin White, who might be the most reliable tackler? Maybe Nakobe Dean, who's most, when it comes to just positioning, is in the best position? Is it Jeremiah Trotter, who's maybe the most instinctual? There's so many different things that when you look at it, you have to look at Green Bay and what they present, because what they're going to do, it's going to be a lot of 3-4 wide, a lot of wide receivers, but you still have to remember that they have this triangle of those 2 young tight ends and a running back. Are you going to want more of these safety types with a Cooper DeJean, a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, maybe all the young corners on the field?
Give me a Keely Ringo out there against one of those tight ends.
I don't want linebackers. Like, those are better players in the secondary than the linebacking position, regardless.
I don't want Baun or Dean playing a lot in this matchup. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, in 12 personnel, Green Bay's just going to run it down your throats then if you're so DB heavy. Well, like, that's the
make them do it first and then we can adjust. Yeah,
exactly. And I think Cooper DeJean has shown he can tackle and run fit. And same with Quinyon Mitchell this summer. And Keely Ringo's a bigger player. I think I would prefer Nakobe Dean to play over Zack Baun this Friday. I think it will be a rotation. But gun to my head right now, I think Baun will start off playing more with Devin White in those packages where there's 2 linebackers. But, you make a great point. I think quickly you will learn, though, especially in a matchup like this, Zack Baun probably should not be playing over those guys.
The thing last year was at linebacker, it was so quick and so evident that you did not have anybody that could cover. And we know Nakobe Dean, he wasn't 100% fully healthy at that time. He has to come out there and show that he can be that player. Because if you have to change things around and let's say they do a really good job of running Josh Jacobs and it's like, then they start passing. It's like, we can't really take a linebacker off the field because we have to respect the Josh Jacobs element. Yeah. That's when things start to get a little bit interesting. But we'll hear from Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers in a couple days, the confidence of how they feel about these 2 young tight ends. I'm assuming Musgrave is the one who's going to get more of the target share between him.
I think over Kraft, yeah.
And at the same time, the wide receivers, that's a basketball room right there. So it's like, are you going to want Avonte Maddox on Christian Watson at any time if he's out there? Like, no, like you're going to have to play the bigger cornerbacks just out of necessity. If Jaden Reed is out there, then you're probably going to want one of these smaller guys to go and cover. But
I think it'll be Quinyon against Reed the majority of the time, since Reed's going to be primarily their slot receiver, I'd imagine. So it'll probably be Quinyon versus Jaden.
And then where does Reed? Reed might be like your pseudo second linebacker in most of these situations, Lou, where he's going to play that strong side. He's your most reliable tackler. That way you can have somebody that is going to make Green Bay guess a little bit like, oh, can we go against him in coverage? Can we kind of get in the run game with him as a conflict player? But he's good in the run game. But can he be good enough in the pass game and take away the coverage element? That's where it'll be tough. But Vic Fangio is going to throw a lot of different things at them, which is going to be much like Kellen Moore, where the defense last year, they kind of just lined up and played too. Fangio, he's been creative in the preseason, and I'm sure that was only a small percentage of what we are going to see when he has all of his guys out there. When you have Jalen Carter and you have Jordan Davis and all these guys at edge, like the stunt games that they're going to be able to run up front, the games that they're going to be able to run on the back end because of the athleticism that they have. You're in a much better situation now than you would be if you had the defense from last year going into this matchup by a mile and a half.
By a landslide. Even if Zack Baun's out there, you match up so much better against these deeper teams that have a lot of weapons than last year. I think Isaiah Rodgers, by the way, will be the starter on the outside in nickel. And Fangio said today they'll probably be running nickel more than any package.
Yeah, that's what he bases.
And guess what? That's going to be every week.
Mm-hmm.
So most defenses play primarily nickel, DB heavy. Isaiah Rodgers, probably your outside guy in 3-corner looks. I'm very curious about that matchup too, Gino. Like when Christian Watson's on that side, Watson is a explode. Like I know that's a deep receiver group, but I think Watson's like the key passing target to watch. Like if he's healthy, he's their best receiver in my opinion. And I am curious. I think Rodgers, the leash could be short because, as you mentioned, there's so much optionality now personnel wise. Like they could put Quinyon on the outside and throw DeJean or Maddox in the slot. They have Keely Ringo, so Rodgers, like I want to say the leash for him is probably shorter. Like him and Zack Baun, they have to have success pretty quickly because they've got young guys breathing down their necks.
I'm going to say that you probably start the discussion in coverage saying Darius Slay, you're going to take their number one, which will probably be Christian Watson wherever he goes. And then to me, Lou, I say Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Who do you think you can take away in this pass game? Because he's going to be maybe the biggest guy on the back end because you talk about the size of these guys like Romeo Doubs. When he gets on Isaiah Rodgers, they're going to have to put safety help over the top at some point because that's a big guy. Like
Rodgers bites sometimes too. Like that's like Watson loves the sluggo, man. Isaiah, I'm very curious about what he's going to do Friday.
It's going to be such a basketball game out there. Like you're going to see like coaches changing their personnel after Green Bay subs out their offense like a basketball game, Lou, when you're subbing guys between the foul shots because you want to get the right guys out there defensively and take away those matchups. And what happens when they go tight end heavy? Are you going more safeties out there? Are you going to throw all three out there with Cooper DeJean as well? It's going to be exciting, man. And I don't think you see one personnel grouping in terms of the defense really dominate when it comes to like snaps outside of Darius Slay being on the field and Jalen Carter. Interior is going to rotate. Edge is going to rotate. Linebacker is going to rotate. Everybody in the secondary is going to rotate. It sounds
like no pitch count for Brandon Graham even on the edge. Like
get the best guys out there against their best guys is really what it comes down to one way or another.
Yeah, it's fascinating, especially on defense, to see what Vic Fangio, like obviously seeing what Kellen Moore's offense is going to look like. Cannot wait, but I can't, especially against this kind of team, which is the team like that killed you last year. Any offense that had more than like two weapons, Philadelphia just could not handle them. They didn't have the personnel, and now with such a multifaceted scheme and so many different moving parts personnel-wise, it's going to be a really fun chess match against a deep, young, exciting, electric Green Bay offense. What starters are we maybe a little most nervous about, I would say, heading into this game? We'll get into that and more as we wrap up this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
This episode of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Yes, Prize Picks is back yet again, and Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You want to play Prize Picks alongside Drewski, Joe Budden, MMA champ Sugar Sean O'Malley. You can now find the community plays under the promos tab on the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. We are the biggest fans of Prize Picks here at Locked On. We're so thankful that they are back yet again. You could play Thursday night with the Chiefs and Baltimore, play Friday night with your Eagles going up against the Packers. And all you have to do is download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game.
All right, we're wrapping up this Monday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, taking a first look at Eagles-Packers this Friday in Brazil. And Gino, we were talking about the starting lineup. It looks like probably a rotation at linebacker between Zack Baun and Nakobe Dean. They're going to use a lot of DBs, so I think there will be times where Devin White's your only linebacker out there. Sounds like Isaiah Rodgers is going to be the first man up at outside corner in nickel situations. And then there's going to be a rotation, like up front. Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff will probably be featured on the edge, but Vic Fangio said today there's no pitch count for Brandon Graham. Like, he's going to be used a lot. Same with Nolan Smith. I imagine there's some plays for Jalix Hunt. On offense, it's really just Mekhi Becton that's like a new starter that you really wonder how he's going to look in his debut. And it's a tough matchup. Like, Kenny Clark is one of the most underrated defensive tackles in football. So I do wonder how Becton is going to start off the year.
When you look at Mekhi Becton now lining up with Cam Jurgens to the left of him, Lane Johnson to the right of him. Even though Cam and Lane played together, it was at right guard and right tackle. Now there's a new guy in between both of them. When you think about the offensive line game, communication is key. You have to be able to pass off stunts. You have to be able to be on time when it comes to your combo blocks, recognizing where the blitz is coming from. So when him and Cam are in those combo block situations against Kenny Clark, that's going to be key. Those situations when you're lined up against their best interior pass rusher, and then those times when they line Lane Johnson up on an island, which they do a ton. How is Mekhi Becton going to respond to pressure at a new position? It's completely different when it comes to setting in the pass game. It's completely different the width that you have to take when passing off guys in the stunt game. It's going to be very intriguing because if you find a hole and Green Bay can expose that, they got multiple pass rushers that they can send their way, man. Like Rashawn Gary, all of a sudden you line him up as a 3-tech. Now you take advantage of his speed and his power against a guy like
Preston
Becton.
Smith's on the other end. Like, they're underrated.
They got some guys that are going to give a guy like Mekhi Becton, who does play a little bit bigger naturally because that's just how big he is. Those guys can play with leverage. They can get under his pad. So it's going to be a big game from him right away. I think you make a great point that as good as this offensive line is, Green Bay, where they're the best on defense, it comes down to that defensive line, man. They are a deep, talented group with some really good veteran experience like Kenny Clark and Preston Smith.
Yeah, it's very much like the Eagles' defensive line right now, where there's some really good, underrated young players. There's a lot of established veterans, and it's kind of a strength in numbers kind of unit where there's not one legitimate alpha. I think the Eagles do have that, and Jalen Carter and Bryce Huff could be that guy, but it is really like a committee approach where it's a whole group effort. It is a rotation, and it's pretty underrated. So I really look at, not that I'm worried about this matchup, but like that Cam Jurgens Becton 1-2 punch on the inside. Like, yeah, that really is the one. Outside of what we were discussing on defense with Zack Baun, Nakobe Dean versus those tight ends, I'm a little worried about that matchup. But the one on the offensive side of the ball is how do Becton and Jurgens handle a tough first matchup? Like, that is not an easy out.
Communication. You can't say it enough. But when you watch this game on Friday, and if you don't watch the game like this, you're missing out. Don't watch the running back when the snap starts. Watch the center. Watch the guards. That's exactly how the play is going to start. And you're going to see right away if Mekhi Becton is out of position and all of a sudden you see one of these guys zip past his shoulder, yeah, Lane Johnson's going to get on his rear, and Jeff Stoutland's going to get on his rear, and they're going to hear it, man. This is an offensive line that prides itself in protecting the quarterback after a season where Jalen Hurts got hit more than he should have probably last year. You got to start strong, and this isn't going to be an easy test, man, and it's not going to be easy the rest of the way. Like, what's going to happen when you're playing your divisional teams and you got to go against Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence, and then you go down to Dallas and you got Micah Parsons and that whole group, and what Washington presents. You have to understand on this offensive line, we have to protect our quarterback. Interior pressure is the worst thing that can happen for a QB. We reference Tom Brady's point on this all the time. And especially for a mobile guy, if you flush Jalen Hurts out of the pocket where he is so good, Lou, he could be a little erratic at times, man. Like, he could play that superhero ball, but at the same time, he is Jalen Hurts, and he does some magical things that you can't take away when he does get out of the pocket.
Yeah, I think you look at the middle of the field on both sides. Like, if the Eagles can stop Josh Jacobs on the run, because you made a great point earlier. If you don't do that and you have to keep a linebacker on the field, they'll be able to start picking you apart in coverage, like in the passing game with all those weapons. So I look at the matchups. I don't want to say I'm worried about, but I think are very crucial, and there are questions. It really is that Becton-Jurgens combo against a really good interior Packers defensive line. And I'd say on the other side, it's Zack Baun and Nakobe Dean. Like, how are they used and can they have success so Vic Fangio's hands aren't really tied?
We'll probably see a clear difference from the play that you saw last year, but at the same time, it's going to take
it's going to take kind of that's a low
sussing out who are the best two together, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to see a combination of, let's just say, Nakobe Dean and then Devin White, and maybe Devin White doesn't have his best game, but then you take him off the field and Nakobe Dean and Trop play good
point.
together.
Like Devin White's not guaranteed to just be the stud that plays every down. Like
Fangio owes none of them anything. I mean, he didn't even have Nakobe as the starter until like a week and a half ago, so he doesn't owe any of these guys anything. If you don't play in the position, if you're not filling your gaps, if you're not reading the A to C gap correctly where you're supposed to fill, he's going to find somebody else to do it because he does not want to play with linebackers on the field. He, like Howie Roseman loves trades, Vic Fangio hates linebackers on the field. He wants to play as nickel heavy, as dime heavy, especially in this game, Lou. It is going to be an air raid type of feel where it's like all of a sudden you got three guys behind you because they're throwing go routes, the guys that run 4-3-8. Like that's what's going to happen, and you can't have a linebacker on the field in that situation. So if you're playing slow, you're a step behind because you can't read and react properly. The linebacker, it's evident, man. It's like you see it clear as day. The Kaiser White, TJ Edwards to the crappiest of crap linebacker combinations that they have had with the Nate Gearys of the world. Like that differentiation in play, especially in 2024, Lou, where teams, if they take advantage in the middle of the field, which all those teams did against you in 2023, you could go down a slippery slope. But if they come out right away, Lou, and kind of establish the middle field, take it away, make those high percentage throws, lower percentage throws because you're all over them in coverage and Josh Jacobs can't get it going and you force things to the sidelines, then you're kind of playing into your hand and Vic Fangio can really start to hit home on some of the things that he wants to do.
It's going to be a really fun matchup. We're going to dive into it 4 more times still, Tuesday through Friday, getting you ready for the Eagles season opener in Brazil against the Green Bay Packers. Until then, though, we're going to sign off. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase. Have a good rest of your day. As always, thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.